Hello. I randomly give my opinions on certain things, and today I would like to do another video that I would like to talk about my opinion on a very important topic that I see often on media nowadays, which I labeled as Chinese exceptionalism. You typically see exceptionalism for Americans or Europeans, but it's not a very mainstream talking point for the Chinese. So this is a phenomenon that I observed among liberals, leftists, and typically people on the left, where they point out very logical problems or faults with the American society and as well as the European society or Western society in just general. And this causes a very big problem where even though they are well positioned in their arguments, they generally make China seem as if it is more virtuous, logical, correct, and all of those things, as if it's the best economic and governance model that it can be, or that we can make as humans in general. So I would like to point at some structural problems that I think are very important and people disregard. This will seem more obvious over time in a few decades, as we become or as we grow older, right? Right now, it might not seem obvious Chinese dominance in tech, semiconductors, chips, and they're reverse engineering ASML machines now. So it seems like they're unstoppable, but they're really not. They have more problems than even America's problems right now, even though American debt and all of those, Trump and all of those factors seem impossible. Okay, so I believe there are like four important key points that I have to make to prove why Chinese exceptionalism is just wrong. For first, it's the more mainstream talking point, which is demographics. So if you look at Chinese population data, their fertility rate is around 1.0 to 1.2, which is way below replacement, and in certain um, provinces, it is way below 1.0, right? So this causes a problem where their population is crashing at a very high or very fast pace. They're losing a large chunk of their population, and by like 2040 and 2050, their population would essentially halve. This might seem like a good thing if you think overpopulation is just bad in general, but there are some really important problems because um, when you have um, old people in society, you typically need economic and social safety nets to accommodate them, and this essentially comes from the um, working age people pumping money into the economy through consumption and productivity, and this essentially causes a problem where um, one working age adult has to support four grandparents, right? Um, and that's a very big problem, and it's not really sustainable. And they are trying to counter this issue. The Chinese government is very much aware of it, and they have been trying to counter it by somehow increasing the population through social reforms and banning certain cultural ideas. And they have also um, doubled down on automation to ensure that it doesn't have that much of an effect on the labor market, which I think is fair, but uh, automation by itself also has certain problems that I will point out in my next point. So on one hand, you have the demographics. Second major problem that I would consider is the economic imbalance and the current state of the economy. So China is majorly an export-driven economy, and this causes some major problem where um, they basically and subsidize their industries to increase their export output, and this basically causes where they have to dump their export surplus and products into other nation states and societies um, to essentially take back the profits, right? And this causes a problem where if you dump too much into other nation states, that basically kills jobs and the economy of that nation state. And this basically has led to the European nations and US kind of recede away from the free market principle and be more protectionist. You can see it through tariff wars and all of those factors. A lot of the world is becoming more protectionist now. It's not just a Western society. Even South America and African nations are now becoming more protectionist on tariffs to protect their domestic industries, right? And this causes a major problem where they have an export surplus, which is driving most of the GDP, but they can't actually make use of it. And the second major problem is consumption. And just within the economy, it's consumption, where basically to make it sustainable, nation states have to sell to their own population, but uh, Chinese consumption is actually very low. It's only like 40%, while the global average is around 60. And this causes a problem where there isn't proper circulation in the economy, and a lot of it just goes into savings. I believe 45% of the Chinese GDP is in just savings, and, and this causes a problem where consumption is very low, and uh, people are generally not very trusting in institutional safety nets, which can be a problem because consumption is a major driving for GDP and economic growth around the world. And the Chinese society has been trying to fix this for like about 10 years now, but there are no improvements. And if it actually factors in from my first point, where demographics, like consumption is already low right now, but as the population ages and gets older, this is only gonna get worse because older people generally do not spend as much as young people do. And then if we can get to the third major problem, which is the automation paradox, right? So let's say that they can offset their productivity and demographic collapse by automation and robots. But this basically creates a problem where if they can offset the the labor market, then it basically removes the reason for why free markets exist. Basically, we created a free market and exports all over the world because labor is cheap in foreign countries. But if you can just do it with robots now, why would you have factories in China? You could just create factories in America or Europe or India. This basically will create an arms race where US, China, and European nations would seek to catch up to China in robotics to ensure that they can protect their own industries and be self-reliant. And this basically causes a factor where their progress in robotics and industrial automation basically circulates to it attacking the driver for Chinese growth. Like, why would they buy exports from China when they could just make robots and do it at home? And the fourth major problem, which is more of a philosophical position in my opinion, is the parallel. I guess when you compare how it was back in the 1950s around the Cold War with the Soviet Union, people generally saw the Europe and America for most of it as ugly and decaying. You had the civil rights movement, women's rights movements, labor unions, and all of these factors that made America seem ugly and decaying, right? When you compare to Soviet Union, it actually seemed like they were perfect. There was no fault in society. It seemed like they had a communist utopia, right? It was mainly because they were really good at propaganda. Soviet Union was an authoritarian regime. There was no escape valve for dissent or reforms, social reforms. And this causes a problem where Americans, Europeans, and all people in general saw them as a superior economic model because there are no problems to see. And I believe it's the same with Chinese society today. I mean, I don't disregard their rise or just how efficient their economic progress was from the 1990s to 2010 to 15, and but they are authoritarian, and which leads to a problem where problems in general are not as visible, and essentially this will basically make it seem like they are perfect, but eventually it will all lead to an abrupt collapse because socio-economic crisis. And I believe these are like the main four factors that is plaguing Chinese society today, and they are actually making it worse, right? If you look at the countries that surround it, and in the global stage, the Chinese position is not very good. Um, for example, if you take India, which is one of the fastest growing consumption driven economies in the world, but China has an export surplus, so they actually need India, but with their welfare diplomacy, they have essentially alienated New Delhi, and that causes a problem where no one actually wants to buy Chinese products out of goodwill. So, yeah, I don't think China is as exceptional as people make it out to be.